He was in New York shopping after he had just sealed a major deal for his company and bought himself a nice shiny Rolex watch. And he's in New York City and he's shopping. And he points to an item he wants on the shelf behind the counter. And the guy behind the counter, who looked a little sketchy, even by New York standards, says, "Nice watch, man." And with the exact wrong tone of voice and the exact wrong body language. It just kind of implied that maybe he was going to make a couple phone calls and be wearing that watch by the end of the day if he had anything to say about it. So Tony Blauer, again, a guy who could have handled that situation, no question, without missing a beat, says, "This man, 2 blocks down, I got it for $50. Here, feel it. Feel how real it feels. I cannot believe how real this looks. $50."
Sir. Yes,
And
sir.
then he went on. Then he went on his way.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and just a great example of that quick thinking, that complete surrender of ego. And because he could have bought in on two ways. Number one, he had just bought this very expensive watch to celebrate a major milestone in his career, so his ego could have gone into, "I'm not going to tell people I'm wearing a fake watch. I earned this watch," or it could have gone to, "I am a terrifying god of war and death, and I am not afraid of you." Right? He could have gone with either of those, but instead he set all that ego down, thought just like that, had exactly the pattern to go, let himself nerd out a little bit, and saved the day.
How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to Conversations from the Hearth. Today we are joined again by Sensei Jason Brick. He's here to talk a little bit about the upcoming seminar that our Visiting Master Series is putting on this weekend. Sensei Brick, thanks for coming back on the show.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for having me again.
Yes, sir.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. So we wanted to talk about your book just briefly, talk about the seminar, drum up that interest, because we are very excited for you to be coming here. I think you have a unique skill to offer our students, one that we talk a lot about in the industry, how to de-escalate violence with not only your skills, but also with your words. But it's something that's very rarely taught. And so I think this is a really special opportunity for our students and anyone in the local area to learn these skills. Jesse, what are some things that we can ask Mr. Brick?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. So at the beginning of the book, there I was when nothing happened. This is a collection of stories of people in situations of de-escalation or situations where violence could have occurred, but through their experience, through their techniques they employed, they were able to avoid the worst possible outcomes. You talk about 4 stages of violence prevention, and I was hoping we could touch on those and share a little bit about, how you came to those ideas and what those 4 stages are.
Sure thing. And the book structures around these 4 stages of violence prevention, beginning with preparation, moving to awareness, then to de-escalation, and then finally evasion. And those are 4 labels I put on what's a continuum, right? Where it starts over here and it ends over there, and I could have as easily split them into 3 or 12 or 300 different stages, but 4 seemed to work. It was the most intuitive for the book. And each of those, it represents kind of a timeline of avoiding violence, where ideally, for example, say you're planning a bachelor party with your friends, right? And bachelor parties, traditionally, there's a little bit of booze going on, there's a lot of testosterone going on. It is one of those situations where it could end in violence even if you started the evening not intending it. And so you begin that by choosing the bars carefully, where you don't go into the bar that is known for the college rugby team that is always looking for a fight at 10:30 at night, right? Or better yet, you have it at your house, you have a few beers in the backyard. So and that way you've avoided violence completely.
We don't go out 6th Street.
Exactly. Yeah. My last time in Austin was in fact at a bachelor party. My brother was at Fort Hood for a while and ended up there in Austin. So, but yeah, 6th Street. We left there pretty quickly.
Sure.
But that's the idea, right? You've avoided the mere possibility of violence by simply preparing ahead of time, knowing the neighborhoods, knowing the, what bars are safe to drink in, what bars aren't so safe to drink in, what bars are safe for some folks but not for you. Right? Same thing applies when you're planning a trip for your family, knowing what parts of town, what destinations will work out better than others. And that's also, any preparation such as reading the book, attending this seminar, getting your martial arts training so you walk and move in a way that predators decide to go bother somebody else. This is all in that preparation stage. But it doesn't always work. And then that next stage is awareness, where you're in that bachelor party and you're watching the crowd in the bar and you're watching your buddies. And you're keeping an eye out for little signs that trouble might be coming before the trouble's there. And then you act on that decision. In fact, we were talking about those 4 stages. Originally, the book had 5 stages where I split awareness into awareness and avoidance. But then as I was analyzing the stories and thinking about how to teach it, the awareness doesn't do you any good if you're not also using it to avoid the trouble. So I kind of collapsed into a single step. And then if that awareness doesn't work, or if you choose to ignore that awareness, or every once in a while you get blindsided, then the next stage is de-escalation, where you're using your words and your body language to take somebody who seems to intend violence and convince them that that's not what they want to do today. And maybe taking this bachelor party idea, that might be convincing your buddy to settle down and have a glass of water, or might be convincing the other guy in the bar to go have fun with his friends, and you stay over here and have fun with your friends. In fact, I'll tell a story that happened very recently. I was at a concert with a friend of mine who, he's not always the smartest person to spend time in public with, and he was bumping chests with a guy over some stupid argument about politics and before the concert. So I grabbed my friend, who's never done a day's time in his life, and I put my back to the guy he's bumping chests with, and I say, "Dude, you just got off probation." and let him out of that part of the concert venue. And that was a simple de-escalation. I let my friend know I wasn't going to put up with that nonsense. I put a little implied threat on the other guy, gave him a face-saving exit, and used that de-escalation skill.
Yeah.
And then finally, if de-escalation doesn't work, then we move on to evasion, which I originally called that escape. But in my initial research, found out that a lot of the tactical guys didn't want to escape; they wanted to evade. So, and we talk about, and there are ways to make that work better or worse. One of my very favorites comes from a former CIA agent who carries a $5 bill around with him. And if he thinks something's going to go wrong, he drops that bill on the floor. Human eyes follow that bill. And while those eyes are on that bill, his feet are turned around and running the other direction.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And so those 4 steps, and again, they're arbitrary. It could have been more, could have been less. They create a framework by which you can plan avoiding violence and train for avoiding violence in much the same way that any technique that you learn on the mat creates a framework for starting a violent situation and ending it with you and hopefully a couple of other folks involved going home as well.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
That first step, preparation, I think is so important and so often overlooked. And I think a lot of people think, well, if I'm a great martial artist, I can just go wherever I want and do whatever I want and I'll be safe. And that's not how the world works, We were reading at our retreat this year, the 20 Guided Principles of Karate Do, which if you've never read it, it is an amazing read by Gichin Funakoshi. And there's one story in there, maybe you can remember better than me. I'm trying to remember where one master has 3 sons, and they, because you always got to tell a joke in threes, and like the first son, I can't remember how it goes. Can you remember?
Yes, sir. So this is a sword master, and he calls his 3 sons into the room one at a time, his oldest to youngest. And the oldest son comes in, opens the door very slightly, and he notices that there's a little pressure, and he looks up, and there's something sitting on top of the door. And he says, "Oh, this would fall on me if I were to walk through." And so he holds it up, moves the door, replaces the door because he knows his brothers are coming. The second brother walks through the door, opens it quickly, kind of falls on his head, and continues into the room. The third brother opens the door, notices it's falling, draws his sword and like hits it or cuts it or whatever it is. And the thought is, oh, this is the brother that of course should be the one to carry on the lineage because he's so skilled. He's such an amazing practitioner. And basically the father says, yeah, I disown you. How could I ever let somebody so reckless carry on my lineage? Because your first thought was violence, violence, violence. Your first thought was to use the sword and to slash.
Yeah. You know, I was actually thinking of a different story. It was along with the horse,
yes,
where they're trying to go behind the horse, and one of the sons, he just goes recklessly right behind the horse, and it's like he definitely dodges it, but it's like he disowns that son because what a moron to just walk straight behind a horse with no regard to the danger of that situation. And you know, that's really important. And if you are good at that, you never even have to resort to the other levels of de-escalation. I have, you know, met a lot of people in my life who say, yeah, I've gotten in a lot of fights. And I'm like, why? You're really bad at preparation, really bad at de-escalation if you're getting in fights all the time.
Yeah, I mean, every story that ends with, so I whooped his butt, is a story that begins with screwing up a perfectly good de-escalation plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's I remember I can't remember the author, but he did a number of children's books. Oh no, I'm sorry, it was Dan Millman. Dan Millman's children's book. And he had this thing I was teaching this kid karate about. If a train's coming, jump out of the way. You know, teaching some basic Aikido principles. But I always wondered, why are we encouraging him to walk on the train tracks?
Sure. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I can guarantee 100% that I will not be hit by a train by observing one simple rule.
That's very true.
You know, so, and I agree. I think preparation it's kind of like de-escalation. It's the thing that we pay a lot of lip service to in martial arts, but we don't spend a lot of time teaching it. So it's undertrained, and also I think it gets a lot less credit than it deserves, because if we prepare well, and often we prepare almost reflexively all the time, but because if you prepare, not only do you avoid violence, but you avoid the situation that might have led to violence. You don't appreciate it. You don't see when that preparation worked for you.
You know, yeah.
Yes, sir.
We just did some, is it CRACE training? The Citizens Response to an Active Shooter training. And they were talking about how, and it seems common sense to people like us, because we've been thinking about these kind of scenarios since we were just little boys, but you know how like you need to think about where you're sitting in a room, like where are the exits, you know, where could someone be coming in, and run through possible scenarios and possible solutions, or you're going to be caught flat-footed. And you know, when he was saying it to us, he was like, you know, you probably don't think about this kind of stuff. And I'm like, no, I think about this every day since I was like a little boy, because I'm doing martial arts.
Yeah.
When you think about it, most people don't. And I think one of the central things that they were trying to do in that training is just to wake people up and say, look, everything could be a potential threat. You need to be aware of those risks that are around you and prepare.
Yeah.
I like the distinction here. So preparation versus paranoia, right? I feel like growing up, middle school, high school, you know, a lot of these really impactful events of violence in our country were broadcast to us as middle schoolers, high schoolers, and that made me really paranoid for a really long time. And I would always think to the maximum extreme of what is the absolute worst thing that could happen. And something that I'm really enjoying, even just with this conversation, is remembering that just like these principles are on a spectrum, so too are these situations, right? Like you can de-escalate. You don't have to de-escalate an angry mob, right? You could de-escalate, you know, a single person who is just on the very edge of getting angry. So before you even get to that angry emotion or whatever that is, like you can have that conversation and just move past before the larger violence even rears its head. And that's
absolutely. And we'll get into this in the presentation, but also de-escalating ourselves.
Yes, sir. Yes,
in
sir.
those situations, because very often, we'll talk about in the presentation also about the difference between male violence and female violence, which are very different. I don't mean to be sexist, but sometimes biology and the world create different situations. But with most male violence, there is an offer of violence and an acceptance of violence, because the way different predators target different kinds of people. And so if you de-escalate yourself, and instead of saying, "You got a piece of me, you know where I'm from," instead of, "Hey man, I'm really sorry. I was having a rough day. You did not deserve that.
Mm-hmm.
My boss is on me. My girl broke up with me today. Can I get the next round?" But that requires de-escalating yourself before you can de-escalate the other person.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, for sure. So in writing this book, you met a lot of really amazing martial artists and probably heard a ton of awesome stories. Is there like one or two stories that really stuck with you that you could share with us?
I can share a couple of them. And for those who haven't heard about the book, this book came about when I was interviewing people for my show, Safest Family on the Block. And I noticed this pattern that the most dangerous people I talked to were the most reticent to actually use violence. And this book is a collection of 50 true stories from martial artists, CIA agents, soldiers, police, even a couple of criminals, about times that they could have gone to violence and they didn't. And I'll be sharing some of those stories during the presentation. Now, there's one that didn't quite make the cut just for schedule reasons, but is one of my favorite examples of very simple, quick thinking that stopped a situation in its tracks. And this is from Tony Blauer, who is a legend in the reality-based self-defense community. This guy absolutely, if the situation had come to violence, the outcome is not really in question. Sure. And he was in New York shopping after he had just sealed a major deal for his company and bought himself a nice shiny Rolex watch. And he's in New York City and he's shopping. And he points to an item he wants on the shelf behind the counter. And the guy behind the counter, who looked a little sketchy, even by New York standards, says, "Nice watch, man." And with the exact wrong tone of voice and the exact wrong body language, that just kind of implied that maybe he was going to make a couple phone calls and be wearing that watch by the end of the day if he had anything to say about it. So Tony Blauer, again, a guy who could have handled that situation, no question, without missing a beat, says, "This man, 2 blocks down, I got it for $50. Here, feel it. Feel how real it feels. I cannot believe how real this looks. $50."
Sir. Yes, sir.
And then he went on his way.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and just a great example of that quick thinking, that complete surrender of ego. And because he could have bought in on two ways. Number one, he had just bought this very expensive watch to celebrate a major milestone in his career, so his ego could have gone into, "I'm not going to tell people I'm wearing a fake watch. I earned this watch." Yeah. Or it could have gone to, "I am a terrifying god of war and death, and I am not afraid of you." Right? He could have gone with either of those, but instead he set all that ego down, thought just like that, had exactly the pattern to go, let himself nerd out a little bit, and saved the day.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, and you had mentioned before that part of that de-escalation is in yourself. Maybe that's the hard part. Honestly, it's sometimes easier to deflect the responsibility to other people and say, "I'm going to de-escalate on their end." But a lot of that comes from yourself. And you were saying a lot of the violence is male on male violence, which tends to be sort of if we went back to the animalistic days, like rutting, like a two bucks or something, like we're just getting up there and we're trying to see who's more dominant, who's going to get the females, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And we can be, a little bit more sentient and a little bit more wise. We can say, "Look, is that really important? I'm never going to see this person again in my life."
Exactly. That just having that sense of mind. And I think that going back to the preparation, the training we do, the books we read, the people we spend time with, the shows we watch, all the things that go into our brains and tell us, and feed into our image of ourselves and what's important about ourselves. That is a place to start. And for those of us with kids, how we teach them what's important. I was raised in a family, and my parents were fantastic, but I was raised in a family that kind of glorified, male jockey meaningless violence, right? And my 20s would have been a lot easier if I had been raised with a different attitude towards that. I came out okay, didn't, nothing permanent, but that's, that kind of preparation can start with what we feed our children.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Well, Sensei Brick, we are really excited for your seminar. I think we've given people just a taste. We don't want to give them too much. Some cool ideas for de-escalation. Great story about that Rolex. Guys, if you want more, you got to come on Saturday, 11 to 1 here at the Dojon, and get those juicy bits of awesome information.
It's going to be a lot of fun. Thank you guys for hosting me. I'm really excited about this.
Absolutely. And then, guys, you got to pick up a signed copy of his latest book. It's great. You're going to love it.
Yeah, I just want to say that more than anything else, I am so honestly shocked and happy with the quality of people who decided to become part of the project. These are heavy hitters, real names, legends, as well as, folks that we haven't heard of who just had really great stories. I'll share one little anecdote or situation, then we'll head on with our day. I had the hardest time finding somebody to write an introduction for the book. Because for folks who aren't in publishing, when you're doing what you basically do to get an introduction is you find somebody who's like one weight class above you. If you can, you get 2 or 3 weight classes above you to just write a quick introduction for a few $100, and then you can put their name in some of the stuff. So, for example, if I'm writing a horror novel and I can get Stephen King to write a quick introduction, then it shows up on when people look for Stephen King in Amazon. It's a thing people have done in publishing since the early 20th century. I started reaching above those, reaching out to people above my weight class on this, and was in this situation where every single one of them would say, I don't want to write the introduction. I want to tell my story.
That's awesome.
And so that's how we got folks like Tony Blair and Mark McYoung and Rory Miller to get involved. So I feel so privileged to have been entrusted with these stories and to bring them out to folks. So thank you all, and I'm really, really looking forward to seeing you guys tomorrow.
That's awesome. Yes, likewise. Sir. We'll see you then.
All right. Be safe. Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed that podcast, please consider liking and subscribing to our YouTube channel, as well as hitting the notification bell. We offer in-person, group, and private lessons at our facility in Kyle, Texas, as well as virtual lessons anywhere in the world. If you'd like to learn more about our programs, you can find us online at risingphoenixtkd.com.